If you're into mixing hip-hop music, rap, or anything that's loop-based, stick around because this video is for you. Hi, I'm Robert McClellan, and you've tuned into the Home Studio Simplified channel. This channel exists to simplify the complexities of a home studio and to help you make professional-sounding music in a less than professional space. So yesterday, in case you missed it, I brought Bongonzo onto the channel. He's a 16-year-old YouTuber who makes beats in Cakewalk by BandLab. Now, he's really good at this, and so I invited him on to sort of accommodate the weaknesses that I might have within Cakewalk by BandLab. I don't predominantly work with loop-based material, as I'm more of a singer-songwriter, real instrument kind of guy. So I brought him on, and he actually showcased right before the very eyes of those in the live stream how his process is from start to finish of making a beat. While on that live stream, we then made a beat and named it after the person who commented last. So the beat is called the Zave Nice Beat. And now I'm getting to have my first look at the finished beat that he has mixed. So the way that this is going to play out, he's going to send me the beat of his mix, and I'm going to do like a reaction / critique video to that. And then I'm going to take the multi-tracks that he has split out and sent me in a separate file, and I'm going to fly them into a separate session, and I'm going to mix them myself, and then I'm going to send them back to him so that he can see what my creative taste might be on that as well. So something super fun, a little collab thing that we just kind of put together, and I hope you get a lot of enjoyment out of it, and more than anything, I hope you learn something from it. So let's dive right into the mix now, and let's have a listen to this. All right, so now we've got the beat flown into a completely blank project. There's no processing being done on this audio whatsoever. Let's just go ahead and give a first look and see exactly what it sounds like. So immediately, one of the first things that I'm hearing is like there's a lot of stuff going on in this mix that's not being accentuated properly, just simply because I think, I might be wrong about this, I'm going to see here in just a minute, but I think a lot of this was probably recorded in stereo and instead of being folded down to mono. And so what's happening is there's a lot of information in the stereo field. It's causing some of those items to get buried just a little bit. The instrumentation and the arrangement of it is on point. Just given this genre of music, I would probably make that bass thump a little more and make that 808 play a little bit better with the other bass. But other than that, it's sounding really good. Hats off to Bongonzo for mixing this. That was pretty dope. That was pretty dope. Okay, so right there, especially in that ambient situation, I think is where we're going to have some delay, and reverb is going to play a huge benefit to those areas because it's going to give it the spatiality that it doesn't currently have right now. Definitely a lot of potential though, but it sounds good. Sounds good. All right, so after a first look, I can honestly say, yes, it does need a few things from a mixing standpoint. But really he did a great job. So now let's go ahead and hop on over to the stem project so that you can see me actually mix this and do sort of work some of my magic on it. All right, so here we are. I'm going to open up one of my templates and import audio. And then I'm going to find his files that I've just downloaded. Okay. Okay, so all 15 tracks have been imported. Now I'm just going to simply press the F key and make it all look nice and even across the board here. And then the first thing I'm going to do now that I have these tracks in here, the cool thing is, by the way, whenever you do import these tracks, you're automatically going to get track names based off of what the file name was. The first thing I'm going to do though is I'm going to go through here and listen to what actually needs to be stereo and what needs to be mono, because as I had assumed, all of these are stereo tracks. So when you're predominantly working with samples or MIDI information, most of the time those will be stereo, just simply because, and here's a quick tip for you, by the way, when you go to buy a sample library and they tell you it's so many gigabytes and you're thinking, wow, that's huge. If they take a mono signal and export it stereo, it makes the file size bigger. So you're not actually getting as much as what you think you are sometimes. All right, so now I'm going to go through here just real quickly and figure out what needs to be mono and what needs to be stereo. Okay, so now I have everything pretty much color-coded the way that I want. All of the tracks that I feel like need to be converted into mono tracks have been converted applicably. And then also another thing that Bongonzo did that is a really good idea for you if you're going to send a song off to a mix engineer is he actually included a reference tracks, which was his mix to begin with. That way I can fly this into the project, and at any time I can reference back to that, which will let me know what the artist was thinking whenever they created the song. Did they want the 808 to be accentuated, or were they playing more to the melodies? So in this instance, it looks like he's kind of playing more towards the 808, and I'm going to kind of go with that. All right, so I already have a bus set up for all of my drums. So what I'm going to do is highlight all of these that are in the blue because I'm considering those to be my percussion or my drum section. And I'm going to go ahead and hold the control button, and I'm going to send them all to my drums bus. Now this should change the output of all of them to the drums bus, and it has. So now I can control the volume globally from that one bus and apply effects globally from that one bus without having to put in several instances of a plugin on each individual track. All right, so now I have all of these that need to be converted down to mono, and those that needed to be left stereo, I felt, are left to stereo. Everything's looking pretty much on the up and up. Now I'm going to go to step 4 of my 15-step mixing process, and that is going to be bottoming out all of the faders and switching it into mono. Now there's several different reasons why you would switch it into mono right off the outset. One of the biggest things is to address phase issues, especially with bass instruments. If the phase is off, you can actually lose a lot of clarity and punch just from a phase problem. And I'll show you a little bit here real quickly about how to address those and how to actually hear those, or see those rather. Another great reason to fold down to mono is the fact that it forces you to focus on big wins. What I mean by that is when you have several stereo tracks floating around in the stereo field, you fold them down on top of each other. Now you can really identify what is fighting with one another frequency-wise. So whenever you make EQ adjustments or whatever you might need to do, you're actually going to be carving out areas that you normally would not even hear if it was in a stereo field, because simply sometimes your ears will play tricks on you. All right, I'm going to pull up my console view, go to my master bus, and fold it down to mono here. And now I'm going to select all of the tracks within my project by holding Control A here. Holding the control button, I will now turn all of them down. This will allow me to bring up each element individually and sort of get a feel for it and start to balance it out just from using the faders first, which, by the way, is another huge tip. Using the faders to make your rough mix before implementing any plugins will get you light years ahead of what some people would do when they're trying to mix it as they're adjusting levels. All right, so by hitting the space bar, I'm now going to start the project and slowly begin to turn elements up within the project. I know that these two tracks here are essentially the main elements that he wanted to be showcased, and because of the genre of music, it's also going to be the bass. So I'm going to work on these two tracks first, and then I'm going to slowly bring in the bass. Okay, so both of these share a lot of the same frequencies within the same frequency range. So I think what might benefit here is to just do some additive and subtractive EQ. But first I'm just going to use my levels. sounds like I might actually be hearing some phase issues on these first two tracks. So I'm going to go in and get a closer look at them on the track view. If you go over here to the side panel, just next to the volume meter, you'll see where your cursor actually changes. You can actually make the waveforms a little bit bigger. This will help you, especially whenever you're wanting to zoom in and see things. So I'm going to go to one of these peaks right here. By holding the Alt button, I'm just going to zoom right in. And it does appear that I was correct. So as you can see, when you're dealing with phase issues, what's happening is essentially the peaks and the valleys are fighting one another. As you can see, this peak is going up, this peak is going down. Same thing here. This peak is going up, this peak is going down. So if I was to flip the phase on these, it should, by all rights, sound better whenever it's folded down to mono. Seeing as how it's already in mono, let's see how it changes the sound of it right now. I'm going to turn that bass off so that we can actually hear that a little bit clearer. That's normal phase. Now I'm going to invert the phase. It's very subtle, okay? But here's what I want you to listen for. And this all has to do with, years of training your ears. I want you to listen for that nasally, honky sound that you hear if your radio was left in a toilet. It's the best way to explain this. So if you're listening to a radio in a toilet, you're going to hear this sound. So just listen for that nasally, honky sound. You hear it? Watch it go away. Now it sounds more like the true instrument was intended to sound like. It's very subtle, but pay attention. I'm going to do this one more time. This is with the phase inverted, the correct way, and without. Clarity is added back. Okay, so see, folding it down to mono, I would never have heard that if it were in stereo because you wouldn't even really hear the difference. All right, so let's go back to the tracks now. Now with this particular set of instruments here, it's kind of hard to tell if there's a phase issue happening or not. Just because the intrinsic nature of the instrument itself, it's sort of, I think, is supposed to have that honky sound. But the only way that you can really tell on this instance is to actually just fade in a little bit faster. Or not fade in, but zoom in rather. And just find out. It kind of helps if you go to an area with a lot of information. And it does appear that even here, there are areas where the phase is canceling out one another. Right here, this valley is going down. At the same time, this one is coming up. So they're fighting in and canceling out one another. So I'm going to go ahead and invert the phase on this too. Let's take a listen to the before and after of this. Yep, definitely some clarity added. That one there was even more subtle, I believe, than the first one, but I definitely could hear a significant difference. And I'm sure whenever it's blooms back out to stereo, it'll make an even bigger difference. All right, so let's go back to balancing out these tracks. Okay, so I've went through the entire mix now. I've balanced everything out using only the faders. I've got it sounding really good. I've adjusted some bass levels to make them play well with other instruments, and I've also addressed 2 different phase cancellation issues as we've already seen. So now, let's start sweetening this thing up. Select all tracks and turn the EQ section of the Pro channel on all tracks. The next thing I'm going to do is across all tracks, I'm going to make sure that the EQ is enabled, and I'm going to enable a 40 Hertz high pass filter across all of them. Now I know what you're thinking. That's kind of crazy, isn't it? But just bear with me, because what I've done is essentially cleaned up a whole lot of mud that did not need to be there. Now, granted, on some tracks, that's going to need to be higher or lower, but this is a good starting point. At this point, everyone should know by the things that you've been taught and you've learned on my channel and the channels of others that you should never mix a single instrument in solo only, with the exception sometimes of the vocalist. There are a lot of times when you can mix a vocal in solo with good results. However, it's always best to mix things EQ-wise in context with the rest of the mix so that you know if you're actually hurting or helping things in context with it. One of the best ways that you can do that without sidetracking yourself is to actually select the dim solo mode. What this will do is any track that you have soloed will stay at the volume that you have it at, while the other tracks that are not soloed will go down in -6 or -12 dBs, however you have it set up. So another thing that I am going to do across the board here as well is I'm going to go ahead and enable the console emulator. I personally love the sound of the console emulators when it's mixed across the entire spectrum, all of the tracks at once. It gives it a more analog feel at least. All right, so another quick tip is I'm going to be EQing 2 different instruments that essentially inhabit the same frequency ranges. So now what I'm going to do is wherever I've boosted it in this area, I'm now going to cut it on this track. Now, a quick way that I can actually do this without doing a lot of extra work is to just simply go back to my console view, click in this area, hold the control button, click and drag that spectrum over here. Now all I have to do is simply, the areas that are cut, just boost them by the same amounts. Yet again, because we're in mono, we're not going to hear the full benefits of this right now, but what we are going to hear is at least a little bit more separation between those 2 instruments. So another quick tip that I'm doing is you'll notice that the instruments that I feel like have higher range to them frequency-wise, I am boosting one in the left side, which I haven't got these panned yet, but this is what I'm thinking ahead, which thinking ahead while you're mixing is going to help tremendously. So if this one is boosted in the high end, this one is boosted in the low end, and I feel like these are predominantly going to be on the left side of the spectrum, then the ones that are on the right, I'm going to do that opposingly yet again. It's all about creating a separation between the frequencies. Okay, so in this instance, I am going to actually listen to the bass in solo simply because I cannot hear exactly what it's doing to find the fundamental frequency unless I do so. And I'll show you what I mean by that. Okay, so I'm going to raise the Q on this, which will allow me to kind of hunt around and find what exactly is the fundamental frequency here. And just as I suspected, it's around 77, 75 hertz. So now I'm going to dip that back down. I'm going to bring my high pass filter up even farther now. So by enabling and disabling the high pass filter, what you'll notice is that I'm really not losing any of those bass frequencies, but I'm actually just attenuating all of them that would be troublesome, which is below 68 hertz, which is going to help us later when we get to our kick, because usually the kick's fundamentals are around 65. So this should help us tremendously to get those two to play well together without having to do any mixing ninja moves. Okay, then here essentially what I've done is just low passed everything above 1900 kilohertz. And basically I've got this happy little cat on a fence, which is what a lot of my bass guitar tracks look like. What I've done is I've accentuated the low end fundamentals to make them poke through the mix and still be heard without muddying up the low end, the sub. And then I've also accentuated the high end, which has given it the pluck of the bass, sort of that transient of the bass, so that whenever it hits, you're going to hear it more. Okay. So I think the high end on that is just a little bit too much, but I'm going to go ahead and drop it down just a tad. And then I'm actually using high pass filters like crazy. Now I'm going all the way up to 125 hertz. So a lot of times with a kick, if you actually boost that fundamental frequency and then you cut out around 400 hertz, you'll get the thump of the beater head. Now remember, all of this is being done in mono right now. We haven't got to that point yet where we've bloomed it back out to stereo. That's where the huge payoff is going to come in. Just wait for that moment. It's going to be nice. Okay guys, so we've already went through steps 1 through 7 of my 15-step mixing process. Now, like I've said before, this process does change from time to time, and sometimes I add to or take away a step. But for the most part, I've went pretty straightforward with this. We've just completed step 7, which was EQing all of those elements that were stepping on one another. And now we're going to get the payoff where we get to bloom it back out into stereo and start doing our panning. This is step 8 of the 15-step mixing process. And by the way, if you want a free download of my 15-step mixing process, you can head over to homestudiosimplified.com and find it on the right side of the bar there, or there will be a link included in the description of this video for you to go and download a copy for yourself. All right, are you ready for the payoff? Here we go. Wait for it. Here it comes. You see how everything is just playing together so much nicer now? Here's the beautiful part. That wasn't even the really crescendo moment of this. Now when we start panning, that's when things are really going to start separating. You're going to hear that stereo field really begin to open up. So it's been folded back down to mono after the panning has been done. Now let's take a listen to the before and after with panning. So this is mono. Stereo. But this isn't even all of it. This is not even the icing on the cake yet. Now we can start adding in some effects. my favorite, reverb and delay. So because I already have buses set up for reverb, I'm going to send this to a reverb long haul, to a medium plate, and to a short room. Now I know what you're thinking, that's probably overkill, isn't it? No. By sending this to 3 different reverbs, a short reverb, a medium, and a long reverb, and blending it to taste, I can get it to sound more cohesive and also more natural. I'll show you what I mean. All right, so I've taken all of my reverb sends down to the negative, and now I've soloed the track so that you get to hear this firsthand. When I play this track now, what you're going to hear is the original sound of it, and then I'm going to begin to blend in those different reverbs. Let's take a listen. That sounds pretty good. Reverb is great at controlling certain aspects of a mix to make it sound like it's being pushed back into a mix or even enveloping the mix. What I'm trying to do with this particular track is to get it to envelop. And so I'm going to set my reverb levels a little bit higher than I would normally. And then another trick is I'm actually going to pan the reverb send into the track. Let's take a listen to what that sounds like. Now that sounds a lot more dreamy, airy. It's sort of the vibe that I was hearing in my head already. Because I've panned this track 50% to the left, I'm going to have my reverb long haul 100% to the right. And my medium plate, I'm going to have it 100% left, and my short room to the right again, which will kind of counteract that long haul and sort of give it some more cohesion. Oh yeah, that's starting to sound a lot better. So now let's go ahead and just move on down the line and start adding some reverb in here. And then we'll add some delay on some of those more percussive elements to give them a little bit more depth as well. Okay, so now when we got to the bass guitar, what we're going to do on the bass is I'm actually going to slap a limiter on the bass. I love the CA2A, which used to come stock with Cakewalk by BandLab, but unfortunately when they moved over to BandLab, is no longer available. Hopefully I'm wrong about that. Okay, so next I'm going to slap a send on there to go to my saturation channel. Okay, so essentially what that is doing is making that a more consistent instrument. As you can see, there's lots of peaks and valleys here. It's very dynamic. By throwing on a limiter, I'm actually making it sort of like the same volume across the spectrum. And what that's going to do is just create that bass to be upfront and punchy all of the time, which for this genre of music is predominantly what they like. So now I'm going to go to the clap section, and this is where I typically like to add delay. One of my favorite delays, the soft tube delay. This came free, by the way, with the Focusrite bundles for the plugin collective. Okay, I like that. Let's listen to it in the mix. The cool thing is too that because it's on a delay, now I can pan it different ways, and I can also turn the level of it down just by turning the level down to the delay. This is starting to sound pretty sweet. Okay, so now with the compressor on this hi-hat track, all I'm essentially doing is just controlling the transients. I still want it to poke through and be heard, but I don't want it to be overbearing on the listener. All right, so now I'm going to put Bark of Dog on the kick to get it to hit a little harder, and then I'm going to see if it's actually not playing well with the bass. And it does appear that the 808 is drowning out this kick. Okay, I'm going to put the compressor on the bass. Set these down really quickly. Turn that limiter off. And now from the kick, I will send the kick to the side chain of the 808. And I sent it to the wrong one. There we go. Okay, so now essentially every time the kick is hitting, it's turning down the bass really quickly, just long enough for that kick transient to go through, and then the bass is coming right back up. So it's kind of tricking those frequencies into working together whether they want to or not. All right. I think we are at a place where now we can kind of A-B what we started with and go back to listening to what it sounds like now. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, so essentially we are at step number 9 now, which was slowly adding the desired effects and being mindful of level matching. This was all of the delay, the reverb, and the saturation that we just added. Now we're going to go back to step 10, which is folding down this mix to mono once again and importing the reference tracks, which in this case is already in the project itself. Now the reason why we're going to fold it back down to mono now is just to see if during that process of adding those reverbs and the delays, if we've caused any kind of frequency degradation. And we'll go ahead and give it a listen in mono real quick just to make sure that we have not. Okay, so with my ears anyway, it sounded like it was pretty spot on. There was just a few levels that I needed to change to make them sound a little more balanced. But other than that, I think everything sounds pretty good. So now the next step that we're going to do is we're going to actually fold this back out to stereo, and we're going to listen to Bongonzo's mix versus my mix so that I can get a more stylistic approach to exactly what he was going for. I believe that will also open up my eyes, at least, to see where stylistically he wanted to take this mix and where it's lacking in mine. So I'm going to listen to his first. Okay, now I'm going to switch it back over to mine. Okay, so by A being going back and forth between the two, I can hear that in his mix, at least, he's got his kick drum really punching, and mine is kind of buried a little bit. Still pokes through, but not quite like his is. So what I want to do is then get my kick drum to punch similarly to what his is doing. So I'll do that now. Okay, so now I feel like I've really got my kick up to par with where his kick was just by adding the Drummer S73, one of my favorite compression plugins. So I'm going to A-B now back and forth between his mix and my mix, and then I think, honestly, I'm ready to send this off to him and get his take on it, see what he thinks of it. So here's his mix. We'll start with his, and then I'll A-B back and forth. right, guys, that sounds really good to me. So I'm going to go ahead and send this off to Bongonzo and see what he thinks about my mix versus his mix and see if he feels like I've improved on it any. I hope he does. I hope he likes it. And then also what I wanted to make mention of too is we're still falling under a negative 1.4, 1.5 dBs, which is great for whenever you get to that point to send it off to a mastering engineer. That still gives them plenty of headroom to be able to master this and get it up to par with industry standard loudness without clipping anything. So I'm going to send it over there. Keep your fingers crossed.